I'm Ari Redboard, and this is TRM Talks. I am Global Head of Policy at TRM Labs. At TRM, we provide blockchain intelligence software to support law enforcement investigations and to help financial institutions and cryptocurrency businesses mitigate financial crime risk within the emerging digital asset economy. Prior to joining TRM, I spent 15 years in the U.S. federal government, first as a prosecutor at the Department of Justice, and then as a Treasury Department official, where I worked to safeguard the financial system against terrorist financiers, weapons of mass destruction proliferators, drug kingpins, and other rogue actors. On TRM Talks, I sit down with business leaders, policymakers, investigators, and friends from across the crypto ecosystem who are working to build a safer financial system. On today's TRM Talks, I sit down with MAS Chief FinTech Officer Kenneth Gay. But first, some reflections on today's episode, which is our 100th TRM Talks. I've told this story before, but when I first got to TRM, my former boss, Jesse Liu from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, reached out and said, how can we support you in this really cool thing that you're doing, joining an early stage startup like this at such an extraordinary moment in this space? And she said, why don't we do a webinar where friends from government talk about cryptocurrency policy, regulation, and enforcement? And I said, sponsor a webinar? Like, what does that look like? How do we do this? And I reached out to Esteban Castano and I said, what do you think of this idea? And he said, I love this idea. And ultimately, Jesse connected us with Sujit Raman, who is now the Chief Legal Officer at TRM and the author of the DOJ Cryptocurrency Enforcement Framework at the time. And then Jesse and Sujit, and I reached out to my close friend, Christian Chesky, who is an IRS criminal investigation expert, and asked him to join the show. And he said, well, you don't want me, you want my boss. So he connected me with Greg Monahan, who was the squad supervisor for all the big IRS criminal investigation cases. And our very first TRM Talks 100 episodes ago was Jesse, Sujit, and Greg talking about the cryptocurrency enforcement framework. And that first episode really set the tone. When we started TRM Talks, I honestly had no idea we'd be sitting here celebrating 100 episodes. I never knew we would have a second episode. But what began as a few conversations with friends and colleagues about crypto, financial crime, policy, and national security turned into something way bigger than I ever imagined. For me, TRM Talks has always been about the people, the investigators chasing ransomware across continents, the regulators building frameworks from scratch, the builders trying to get this right as we see institutional adoption at financial institutions across the world. Every single episode has been a reminder that behind every blockchain transaction, every enforcement action, every policy debate, there are real people working to build a safer financial system. Those are the people who have shared their stories on TRM Talks. My favorite parts of every episode are two questions. The first, where we ask about a guest's journey, how they got to this point in an extraordinary career. And the last, where I ask about their interests and hobbies, what they do, the gamers, the martial arts experts, the whitewater kayakers, and the long distance swimmers. These are people who are extraordinary, not just in their careers in crypto, but beyond. Reaching 100 episodes isn't a finish line, it's a milestone. And I'm grateful to everyone who has listened, shared their stories, and helped turn these conversations into a platform for learning and collaboration. Here's to the next 100 episodes. And now, I sit down with the Monetary Authority of Singapore's Kenneth Gay. Today, I have a very special guest, the Chief FinTech Officer for the Monetary Authority of Singapore, my friend Kenneth Gay. Kenneth, thank you so much for joining TRM Talks.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
Let's start with you. Would you talk a little bit about your journey? You've been at MAS for 21 years, which is really an extraordinary amount of time, particularly in this moment of technology where we've seen it really evolve and MAS lead globally. Talk to me a little bit about maybe some of those early days and your journey at MAS in particular.
So when I look back at my career in MES, I see myself as being, in a way, at the intersection of a few key trends, intersection of data, markets, policy, collaboration, and also technology. I actually started my career in MES's enforcement unit in 2004. And back then, I was investigating, insider trading, market manipulation cases, and I had early exposure to using market surveillance tools. So back then already, I gained a realization of how important it is to have good data and digital tools to carry out our work in finance. After that, I was actually, a fixed income portfolio manager at MES's market desk during the global financial crisis. That was an exciting time actually to be a portfolio manager. I remember when, Lehman Brothers went under, I actually had to sell overnight, MES's holdings of Lehman Brothers bonds, which suddenly went from,
Wow.
investment grade to junk overnight. And the market was all scrambling around, and it's an exciting time. I really learned a lot, and experienced, up close and personal, the importance of markets.
It's really interesting, sort of the guests that we've had, a lot are obviously in financial services or in finance. And that period was such a huge watershed for so many people, whether it's as a regulator, really sort of understanding, hey, we need more guardrails or we need the right guardrails. But as folks who were bankers, also sort of understanding how to work with your regulator and understanding risk. So it's just really interesting that you're someone else that brings this up. We had Wiki on a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
You may have seen, and he was talking a lot about how he was influenced at the time as a regulator, but then at financial institutions by that exact same sort of period.
Exactly. It's we all have our own kind of foundational times in our careers, and that was really a foundational time for me. A lot of times when we analyze risk, we look at, a chart, we look at a spreadsheet, we run models, but you don't get to experience what it means to be in a time of crisis, that when, credit spreads are really high, interbank markets are freezing up, what that actually looks like in practice, when people are afraid to place, even like term deposits with each other. That's really a sign of stress in markets that many people forget when times are good. And I think it's important to have that grounding. And I was happy for that time. So after, my time at the markets desk, I went on to spend like several years as a macro financial economist. And there I was looking now at risk more from, like what I shared earlier, from a data perspective, looking at building models, building code, in order to better understand financial stability risks. And during that time, I went through key events in financial history, such as the Eurozone financial crisis. And back then also, what's interesting was a time in my life where I had a chance to get up close and personal to some extent with the crypto market. I still remember it quite clearly. The year was 2017. And Bitcoin, I think, had started the year at around 1,000 plus US dollars, and it ended the year close to 20,000 US dollars. That was quite a key year. And across central banks, there were a lot of questions as to what is happening in this space. What is crypto? How do I understand it? So since I happened to be at a analytical function within the MES at that time, I was asked by my management, why don't you go and look at the crypto market and give us a presentation on it? What is it about? What's actually, happening? And so I was like, okay, let me give it a shot, right? I had a team with me of, economists, and I also had brought in a couple of developers as well. Because when I joined this macro surveillance function, I realized the importance of data and how to actually wrangle that data. So I had a couple of engineers with me as well. And we set about saying, okay, so how do we actually understand the crypto market? What's the best way to go about doing it? And my team, after doing an initial round of checks and analysis, they said, Kenneth, why don't we look at APIs? I think that's a very good source of data. Crypto exchanges publish APIs. You can get good kind of like detailed price information. Why don't we do that for our analysis? And something within me said, hold on, I think there's actually a much bigger and valuable source of information of Bitcoin. And of course, we all know that's the blockchain itself. And I didn't know anything, back then about what the blockchain was, but there was just, something within me that said, I think we should go and look further into this.
How was that received by management at the time? I mean, we're talking 10 years ago, really early days of Bitcoin. As you said, I mean, we saw that huge price jump, but still relatively early. How was it received by management?
I would say back then, the degree of awareness wasn't that high. Yeah, most of us didn't know, what a blockchain was or what the concept was of, wallets, wallet addresses, pseudonymity. There were some in the organization who also thought that a blockchain address was the same as an IP address, for example. I mean, not surprising because both have the word address as well. So there's a lot of, in a way, myth busting that we had to do in those early times. And we've come a long way since then, our other initiatives and so on. But think of this as really just very, very early days in terms of our understanding.
Absolutely. When I listen to you speak now, and honestly, and every time we've ever spoken, you just exude this passion about the technology. And I think it's so important when you talk to regulators that not only are they working on regulation, but they also like put their hands into the technology, that they played around with these things. Would you talk a little bit about how you have leaned in? I mean, it's really, it feels like it's more than a job for you. It's a passion and it's an interest. It's a hobby.
So since even when I was like really young, have had a deep passion for technology. I was the kind of kid that would be very enthusiastic about like building their own PCs, thinking about the parts that go inside it, tinkering around with it, failing a lot of times when things don't work, and thinking through about how I can solve the problem. Actually, that's a very foundational skill, I realized. Right, being able to push through when things are difficult and trying different versions, right, different ways of getting things to work. I actually studied economics at university, but I was very, very close to studying information technology. It's just that I think at that time, that field wasn't as well known. And when I talked to my parents about it back then, they were like, I think probably, go with something that's a bit more regarded and established. And when I look back, I think it went out well. I mean, or rather it came out well. I managed to get a grounding in finance as well, which came to be very handy. And through that whole time, I've really kept that passion for technology. Even my hobbies as well are in a way, technology related. I'm always, thinking about what is the latest technologies out there. On a personal front, what are the latest gadgets out there? So that's in a way how I think and function.
That's fantastic. Talk about the way MAS really got involved in this space, or sort of got deep in this space. MAS has been an early mover on tokenization, interoperability. Project Guardian almost always comes up in these types of conversations. Talk me through sort of how MAS has maybe thought about cryptocurrencies, markets, mitigating risk, and yet not stifling innovation in the process.
I think when it comes to, digital assets, you guys had Wiki on, right?
Yes.
A couple of weeks ago. I think he shared the genesis, right, of Project Ubin. And that really was, I think, a watershed, our early kind of efforts, in order to better understand digital asset technology, digital ledger technology, and the early days of thinking about how to collaborate with the industry as well. Because ultimately, technology is a fast-moving beast. You need to really bring together, both the public and the private sectors, and that's something that MES, embarked on early on. And back then, for Ubin, we explored the area of central bank digital currency. I think when you fast forward a couple of years after that, in 2022, we then came to the realization that beyond central bank digital currency, there is actually an imperative for broader tokenization of assets. And we need discussions to happen in terms of how do we actually go about the process of tokenizing different types of financial assets, whether it's FX, whether it's fixed income, whether it's money market funds. And that was really how Project Guardian came about. It served as a cross-border sandbox program that brings together, more than 40 financial institutions, industry associations, central banks and regulators across 7 jurisdictions. And thus far, we've actually carried out a lot of industry trials across various financial products, including tokenized funds, bonds, stablecoins, and bank liabilities. On top of that also, I think what I'm happy about is that over the years, we've actually published a range of standards and industry best practices across asset classes that really help, each segment of the financial industry to better understand how to bring about the benefits of tokenization for their asset class. For example, in 2024, we published the Guardian Funds Framework, which is a set of recommendations, of establishing a framework for tokenization of the fund lifecycle and activities. We also published the Guardian Fixed Income Framework last year as well, that aims to integrate a bond data taxonomy, token standards, and design principles for tokenized securities. On top of that, earlier this year, we also published FX-related report on tokenized bank liabilities, sharing how tokenized bank liabilities can help to enable real-time settlement and optimize liquidity management as well. So in short, think about our work really as for Guardian, trying to bring about the real-life tokenization at scale of different types of financial assets so that the financial industry can best benefit from tokenization.
Fantastic. Taking you back a moment to that first Bitcoin presentation, I would love to kind of hear how you feel like MAS has moved and how you've moved personally sort of in that process to where you are today, really, and what you're most focused on right now. I recall you mentioning at one point that as part of that initial presentation, you actually ran a Bitcoin node.
Yep.
So you could understand it better yourself and maybe share some of your learnings with, your leadership team. To me, that is absolutely extraordinary. And then we start to see Project Guardian, where you're actually doing sort of like, an ultimate sandbox scenario.
My team basically came up with, I think, a good idea, but I wanted to push it further, go beyond APIs and find a way to look at the blockchain. And that's really how, I did some research, understood what a Bitcoin node was, understood the difference between, if you will, a partial node and a full node hosting the entire blockchain, understanding what are the technical requirements to host this node, and also looking for software back then that can actually analyze the blockchain. So all this was very early years, but there were already frameworks out there. I remember, this technical framework called the BlockSci framework that just came out around that time that enabled, the users to actually analyze the individual transactions. And what we used them for was actually this concept of clustering. The idea that if you analyze a transaction, coming from associated wallets, right, you could actually make some inferences that, these could be from perhaps a particular entity or from a particular country. And we could then make analysis of how, these Bitcoin flows, what were the trends like over a particular period of time, particularly over 2017 when the Bitcoin price rose by a lot. And we gave some initial hypotheses, to our management in terms of what could have been the drivers of this. So if you fast forward then to what you mentioned about Guardian, I wasn't actually involved during the genesis of Guardian itself. I took on this role in early 2025. But the lessons that I think I drew from my early analysis, I think are still quite relevant today. First, I think most importantly is collaboration. I wouldn't have been able to carry out that analysis if not for the team, right, that I had with me, of economists like what I shared earlier who understood financial markets, of developers who were able to help to compile the technical code and run the computations required in order to carry out the Bitcoin analysis. And we see this very much in this ethos of collaboration across our digital asset initiatives. At MES, we are just one party, right? We don't have all the answers. The industry is the one that's really driving a lot of the commercial work, and thinking on how best tokenization can help them. We come in as a party really to help to understand what are the remaining challenges, right? And a lot of these challenges revolve around standards. And that's an area that MES, being in a position of trust, can actually help in. And we've been, through our various digital asset initiatives, really building up, these standards and frameworks so that parties can really come together and scale their digital asset activities.
Really extraordinary. I mean, I would say that probably if you ask me what we were most focused on at TRM right now, it would be very much collaboration, partnership, what we're calling sort of partnering for disruption. For us, it's always a focus on bad actors and how can we partner with the public sector, with other private sector entities to disrupt them. But I think collaboration is absolutely essential when this space is moving as fast as it is. There's no other way to do it than with data sharing, with partnership, with real time. So I love the focus that MAS has had, always had, but really I feel like has right now on collaboration. Sort of moving slightly, I was actually on a panel today and the last question I was asked was, what keeps you up at night? And over the years, it's been all kinds of things from North Korea to ransomware. I think right now it's AI and just how fast for us bad actors are moving. But I know for you, AI has been a huge focus in terms of processes, right? We can now move faster. We can understand data in ways that we never could before, really at the speed of the internet now. As a regulator, how are you getting your head around this?
So the way I see, AI right now, and it does keep me up at night, is we are really at the cusp, if you will, of this it is a revolution that is happening, unfolding before, our eyes right now. So many of us, use ChatGPT, in our daily lives, but in financial institutions, the potential is still, we're barely scratching the surface, right? We can imagine, a future right now, or rather we can imagine a future where, instead of manually putting together spreadsheets or performing research, the financial worker of the future, would have agents, carrying out these more basic tasks for them. And even in the area of compliance, for example, there's a lot of talk already about compliance agents that can already help to perform the first analysis of perhaps a compliance issue, pulling together the rules from, different jurisdictions, making an initial assessment as well. And in fact, on the TRM side, when I spoke with Esteban a few weeks ago, I think there's also some work, thinking about how agents can also enhance the financial crime, detection process. So there's so much potential, and so much work that's going on. But the challenge that I see is really one of getting to that state right? Getting to a state 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when all of us, treat AI as really just part of our work lives, and it's really enabling, so much efficiency and improvements for us, allowing us to focus on, the deeper issues, the more important issues, the human to human, interactions that help to shape and grow the financial sector. How do we actually get to that state is something that really, I think about daily. And how we do that at MES then is through, if I can quickly go through 4 key pillars. So first pillar really is on capabilities. We really want, our financial institutions in Singapore to have top-notch capabilities in building, testing, deploying, and scaling AI solutions. Right now, a lot of institutions the larger ones are already building AI tools and solutions, but they are doing so more in a silo situation. They may not know what's happening across the industry. They may not have communities of practice where they can come together. MES, together with the Singapore government, we've set up more than 30 AI so-called special centers of excellence for financial institutions in Singapore already. So we're helping to grow this community of builders so that our capabilities are strong. The second pillar is that of adoption. Like what I shared earlier, basic tools, a lot of people are using Copilot and stuff like that already. But the more effective tools, the tools that actually help with financial work processes, whether it's on customer service, risk assessment, portfolio analysis, and so on, a lot of financial institutions still aren't adopting these tools. They're on the lookout for such tools, but they don't know where to start. So that's where MES, came in with this program called the Pathfinder Initiative, which I started back in July this year. Think of it as a platform where we bring together financial institutions on one hand and the solution providers on the other hand, right? And we help to create, in a way, a curated list of solution providers who have already deployed their products to financial institutions. And financial institutions find this list really, really helpful because it cuts up so much of their time, required to find out what's out there, and they get a chance to really go through and narrow down to solutions that are helpful to them right now. So now we have more than 100 financial institutions and also more than 100 solution providers on this platform. And we really hope that it can boost, this AI adoption pillar. The third very important pillar of AI for us is governance. So MES, we've been thinking about AI governance for several years already. We started with the FEET principles in 2018. And since then, we've grown, our AI so-called governance principles to generative AI for Project Mindforge. And we've also rolled out recently a set of supervisory guidelines on AI as well. So these guidelines, like what you said, guardrails from a regulatory perspective, helps the industry to understand what the key risks are so that they can innovate with confidence. The last pillar of AI is looking at the workforce. And that is an area where MES is working very closely with our partners, both in government and also the private sector, to really help to reskill and upskill financial sector workers. We want them to be really prepared for the changes that are about to come. If there are role changes that are required, we want them to be at the forefront of it, to be able to learn what they need and get the skills that they need.
It's really extraordinary to listen to that. And following up there, right, MAS in the crypto space, I feel like this very much mirrors that. The early days of crypto where MAS was saying things, quite frankly, before most other regulators globally. And now we're hearing, specific pillars when it comes to financial institutions and AI. Why do you think Singapore is a place that is able to maybe move more quickly than other jurisdictions?
Yeah, so I was at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum at a dinner where our Prime Minister actually shared, great things can come from small places. And so when I reflected on that, it is true that being small, has its advantages. We are able to move faster. We're able to engage our ecosystem perhaps more efficiently because they're all pretty much within, a fairly small area as well. And when I reflect on it, I think that does help quite a bit. Having a smaller size, being able to move faster does allow us to, better think and implement some hypotheses that we have about the future of finance, test them out in a smaller setting so that we can scale them more easily. To your question also, I think perhaps one or two other enablers, I think, is finding people with the right kind of capabilities and skill sets in technology and finance. I'm very blessed to have members of my team, who have these good mix of capabilities. They're not only able to engage on the policy side of things, but also to talk to their industry counterparts about what are the latest technologies out there and suggest improvements as well. That I think is a key differentiating factor that we have.
That's fantastic. It's amazing to watch, and thank you for sharing it with this audience. I saw you at the Singapore FinTech Festival recently, which was great. And I really had a real honor to moderate a panel with Deputy Managing Director Hearn Shin. And she talked a lot about this idea of harmonization, which I think we're hearing from regulators really across the globe. And that is this idea that, look, we're never going to have global regulation when it comes to crypto or AI or anything else. But we may have consistency. We may have harmonization. And we're starting to sort of see that play out a little bit. Can you just talk a little bit about the way MAS sort of looks out at the rest of the world, works with other regulators, trying to bring some clarity or harmonization to the space? I don't think I think the nature of digital assets, right, cross-border value transfer at the speed of the internet lends itself to the need for this type of collaboration.
Yeah, so as a regulator, we are part of global communities, whether it's the Basel Committee, which I used to sit on more of the subcommittees during my time heading banking policy for MES, to payments in the area, say the CPMI as well. MES is represented there. For us, we do have seats, at these global regulatory tables, which we take seriously. We think through, the issues that regulators face around the world and contribute our perspectives on it. So I think that's a helpful starting point to your question about how we can move towards, greater harmonization. Because at the end of the day, for each jurisdiction, each regulator, they will always have their own domestic considerations to take into account when they set policy, including financial policy. But at the same time, also, there's global so-called considerations, global priorities that need to be taken into account. And for MES, we really believe in working, at both levels, working at the global level so that, we can help to, of course, advocate our views, but also think on behalf of the global community about what the key risks are and how to address them. And that, I think, is an important driver in, moving towards that harmonization that you speak of.
You have a really unique role right now, obviously Chief FinTech Officer at MAS in this environment. Are people reaching out to you, other sort of FinTech leads globally? I mean, there still are not that many who are at critical regulators. Are you having conversations with your counterparts on a lot of these issues we've been talking about that you're working on?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The role of a chief FinTech officer, I think, is still quite uncommon. I think MES was the first one, to adopt it, which was my predecessor, Somnendu. But there are central banks and regulators with such a role, and I have engaged them during my time here. Another, I think, related role is that of the chief, perhaps, innovation officer that I also engaged with. During the FinTech Festival, I had the honor of co-launching, a partnership, AI and finance partnership between the MES and the UK FCA. And I'm really excited to be working with them to advance, the AI outcomes that I shared earlier. The UK in particular is, I think, really strong on testing AI solutions, and very excited to work with them and learn with them.
That's fantastic. After some of the work, maybe a white paper or something, we can have you both on, and we can talk about the work that's coming. Speaking of your crazy job, I imagine it is 24/7. And I know you're working a lot because I see you working a lot all the time, day and night. What do you do to relax other than build computers and run Bitcoin nodes and all that stuff?
Man, I like what I shared earlier. I strangely find it quite relaxing to dabble even in technology as well. For some reason, I find it energizing and perhaps sometimes even relaxing to some extent.
What would you say is like in the things that you've built from a technology standpoint? I mean, and fair enough if it's running the node or building a computer, but what do you think the coolest thing is, the most interesting thing that you've dabbled in when it comes to technology?
Something that I've done quite recently, just last night, in fact, is trying to run large language models on my home computers, right? Because technology has really advanced to the stage where you can actually buy a fairly small kind of like a computer that can even run a large language model already. Previously, you need like a huge kind of box, if you will, hosting like multiple GPUs inside it. And I just find this idea of being able to run your own LLM really interesting because I have a lot of ideas then of how I'm going to use it, right? For example, maybe searching for the best kind of like restaurants, the newest restaurants that I can eat at, recommending places for me to go, recommending things that I can do with my kids as well over the weekend. So I'm just thinking of new ideas or new recipes that I can try out, So yeah, a lot of my interests really also, personal interests also revolve around technology. I think it can be enhanced by technology. And I also bring that ethos pretty much when I go to work.
Well, you were born and are working and have the right role at the right time in human history. What an extraordinary thing. Kenneth, I can't thank you enough. I've wanted to do this with you forever. And really, thank you for joining TRM Talks and excited to do much more together.
Likewise.
Thank you so much. A couple really, I think, significant takeaways from this were, first, how cool is it to have a regulator as personally passionate about technology as Kenneth, right? I mean, this was clearly, he's building computers, he's running Bitcoin nodes, he is using language learning models at home. It's extraordinary to see the passion there, and that passion is just so clear in the work. So I think that was a huge takeaway for me. I think, two, when I asked him that question about why does MAS continue to innovate, continue to kind of lead from a technology standpoint? And I love this sort of idea that Singapore is this giant sandbox, or tiny sandbox, if you will, where you have this really important market in this relatively small place, so it can move quickly and innovate and really sort of help financial institutions that are being regulated in Singapore. So I think that was another huge takeaway there. And then finally, just how deep MAS already is on AI and how they've really thought through those different pillars. I don't know if there are a lot of regulators globally that could say, this is where we are right now, and these are the way we're working with our regulated financial institutions today. It really reminds me going back to 2017, 2018, when MAS was leading the charge in crypto regulation. So really a whole bunch of takeaways today. There's probably plenty more, but really a fabulous conversation with a really, really sharp regulator who brings deep technical expertise to that chief FinTech officer role. On the next TRM Talks, it's our New Year's Eve Spectacular, where I sit down with TRMers from across the company, investigations, product, marketing, people, to discuss 2026 predictions on a very special TRM Talks. If you love the show, leave a review wherever you're listening to it. Follow us on LinkedIn to subscribe to our newsletter, The Weekly Roundup, to get the latest news on crypto regulation, compliance, and investigations.
TRM Talks is brought to you by TRM Labs, the leading provider of blockchain intelligence and anti-money laundering software. This episode was produced in partnership with Voltage Productions. The music for this show was provided by Eclix.
Now, let's get back to building.